For decades, Burkina Faso has been known for something remarkably valuable growing across its fields. Cotton. Farmers plant it, families depend on it, trucks carry it across the country, and eventually much of that cotton enters international markets. But there is a question that is becoming increasingly important in Burkina Faso today. Who earns the greatest value from that cotton? Is it the farmer who grows it? Is it the country that exports it? Or is it the company somewhere else that turns that same cotton into thread, fabric, clothing, and finally a recognizable brand sold for many times the original value? That question goes far beyond agriculture. It reaches directly into the future of Burkina Faso and perhaps the economic future of Africa itself. Under Ibrahim Traore, a different vision has begun to take shape. Instead of measuring success only by how much raw cotton Burkina Faso can sell abroad, the government is increasingly asking how much of the value created from that cotton can remain inside the country. Imagine the journey of a single bundle of cotton. It can leave the farm, be processed, packed, and exported. At that point, much of its journey inside Burkina Faso is already finished. But there's another possibility. That same cotton can be spun into thread inside Burkina Faso. The thread can become fabric. The fabric can be dyed, woven, designed, and sewn. Women working traditional looms can transform it into Faso dan Fani. Tailors can turn it into clothing. Factories can produce uniforms. Designers can create bags and accessories. Young workers can learn new skills. And eventually, a product can leave Burkina Faso carrying not only cotton, but the name and identity of Burkina Faso itself. That is the difference between selling a resource and building an industry around a resource. And if you want to understand the changes taking place across Burkina Faso and the Sahel beyond the headlines, follow this channel, because this story is only beginning. The real question is no longer whether Burkina Faso has cotton. The question is how far Burkina Faso can carry that cotton before it leaves the country. This is where Ibrahim Traore enters the story with an idea that could change the way Burkina Faso thinks about its most important agricultural resources. His vision is not simply to grow more cotton or send more of it abroad. At the International Cotton and Textile Exhibition in 2024, local cotton processing was placed at the center of the country's industrial ambitions. Traore encouraged Burkinabe business leaders to prepare for a future in which more cotton would be transformed at home. The difference is important. A country can export more raw cotton and still remain near the bottom of the value chain, while other countries earn more by spinning that cotton into thread, weaving it into fabric, manufacturing clothing, and placing valuable brands on the finished product. Traore's approach seeks to move Burkina Faso further along that chain. One of the clearest examples is IRO Tex Burkina, a textile complex launched in Sorgu as part of a broader effort to process resources inside the country. Plans for the project include producing thread, fabric, clothing, and other textile products. The project has also been presented with projections for thousands of direct and indirect jobs if it reaches its intended scale. Those employment figures are targets, not jobs that should already be counted as completed achievements. Yet the direction of the policy is clear. Instead of allowing cotton's economic journey to end shortly after processing and export, the government wants more stages of production and therefore more opportunities to create value to remain on Burkinabe soil. That could mean Burkinabe cotton entering local spinning facilities, local workers turning thread into fabric, and tailors and factories transforming that fabric into finished products. Eventually, Burkina Faso could sell something whose value comes not merely from the cotton inside it, but also from Burkinabe labor, skills, design, manufacturing, and identity. This is why Traore's approach deserves attention beyond agriculture. He is attempting to change the economic question from how much cotton Burkina Faso can export to how much value the country can create before that cotton crosses its borders. But that ambition raises another important question. If cotton is to become the foundation of a national textile industry, who should control one of the most strategic companies at the beginning of this entire chain? That question brings us to Sofitex, one of the most important companies in Burkina Faso's cotton economy. The company sits close to the beginning of the value chain, connecting cotton production with processing and international markets. Yet Sofitex has faced serious difficulties, including a heavy financial debt burden, high operating costs, delays in payments to cotton producers, and pressure from changing international prices. For a government that wants cotton to become a foundation for industrialization, weakness at such a strategic point in the chain represents more than a corporate problem. It can affect farmers, transporters, businesses, banks, factories, and ultimately the government's broader ambition to process more Burkinabe cotton at home. In April 2026, the government under Ibrahim Traore decided to nationalize Sofitex completely. The state already controlled the overwhelming majority of the company, while private national and international investors held only a small remaining share. By acquiring those remaining private shares, the government moved toward complete state ownership. The significance, therefore, was not simply that Burkina Faso suddenly recovered a company previously controlled by foreigners. That would be misleading. The state was already the dominant shareholder. What changed was the decision to remove the remaining private ownership and place the company entirely under state control as part of an effort to reorganize its operations, mobilize investment, and restore its performance. For Traore's broader strategy, the logic is easy to understand. Building textile factories at the end of the chain becomes much harder if one of the most important institutions near the beginning remains financially troubled. But nationalization itself is not a guarantee of success. Ownership and performance are two different things. The real test will come from results. Can Sofitex reduce its financial problems? Can farmers receive their payments more reliably? Can management become more efficient? And can more Burkinabe cotton eventually feed domestic industries instead of leaving the country before greater value is added? If the answer becomes yes, the nationalization of Sofitex could prove to be an important piece of Traore's industrial vision. And that vision becomes even more interesting when cotton leaves the large company and reaches the hands of Burkina Faso's traditional weavers. To understand why this matters, look beyond the large factories and government offices and watch what happens when cotton reaches the hands of Burkina Faso's traditional weavers. Fani, the country's famous hand-woven cloth, carries a history that long predates Ibrahim Traore. It became especially associated with national pride and local consumption during the era of Thomas Sankara. Women have preserved the craft across generations, turning cotton thread into distinctive fabrics that tailors can transform into shirts, dresses, jackets, bags, and other products. Traore did not create this tradition, and giving him credit for its origins would erase an important part of Burkina Faso's history. What his government can do, however, is connect that existing cultural strength to a much larger industrial strategy. That connection becomes visible when the state helps create demand for locally produced textiles. Under Traore's government, the use of Fani has been expanded in areas such as school uniforms and official clothing. Traditional Burkinabe textiles have also gained greater visibility within public institutions, while court attire for magistrates and clerks has been redesigned using Fani. Economically, this matters for a simple reason. A young textile industry does not survive because people praise it. It survives because somebody buys what it produces. When schools, public institutions, families, and government services purchase locally made textiles, their spending can become income for weavers, tailors, suppliers, and small businesses. This is where culture begins to meet industrial policy. Imagine thousands of students wearing cloth connected to local production, public officials appearing in nationally produced textiles, and more citizens seeing Fani not merely as ceremonial clothing, but as something suitable for everyday life. That creates something factories desperately need: a domestic market. It also gives Burkina Faso an advantage that cannot easily be imported or copied. The country is not beginning with an anonymous piece of fabric. It already possesses a textile with history, identity, and generations of craftsmanship behind it. Traore's opportunity is to help transform that inheritance into economic power without destroying the people and traditions that created it. And nowhere is this connection between cotton, government demand, and industrial ambition clearer than in the uniforms worn by the people responsible for defending the country. That connection becomes especially clear with Tex Forces BF, a project designed to turn Burkinabe cotton into uniforms for the country's defense and security forces. In April 2024, Ibrahim Traore launched construction of the textile facility near Bobo-Dioulasso. The basic idea is remarkably straightforward. Burkina Faso grows cotton, while its government must spend money every year clothing soldiers and security personnel. Instead of allowing those two realities to remain disconnected, the government wants to bring them together. Cotton grown in Burkina Faso can be processed inside Burkina Faso, transformed by local workers, and ultimately worn by Burkinabe forces. In that model, public spending does more than purchase uniforms. It can also support domestic production. This matters because Traore has argued that Burkina Faso previously spent tens of billions of CFA francs outside the country purchasing clothing for its defense and security forces. Tex Forces BF represents an attempt to redirect more of that demand toward production at home. If the factory operates successfully at scale, the economic effect could extend beyond the finished uniform. Cotton producers need buyers. Textile facilities need raw material. Workers need jobs. Factories need reliable orders. The government already needs uniforms. Bringing those pieces together creates a domestic chain in which money that once flowed abroad Njuda circulate through Burkinabe farms, businesses, factories, and households. Traore has also presented an ambition that reaches beyond Burkina Faso. If domestic production eventually becomes large and competitive enough, the country could potentially supply uniforms to security forces elsewhere in Africa. That possibility should still be treated as an ambition rather than an accomplished export success. But it reveals something important about the strategy. Import substitution is not necessarily intended to be the final destination. First, Burkina Faso learns to produce more of what it currently buys from abroad. Then it develops workers, machinery, experience, and production capacity. Eventually, those capabilities could support exports. In that sense, a military uniform becomes more than government clothing. It becomes a practical test of whether Burkinabe cotton can travel from a local field through a local industrial system and emerge as a finished product with greater value still inside the national economy. But the true value of this strategy cannot be measured only by factories, machines, or the number of uniforms produced. Its deeper test is whether cotton can create better opportunities for ordinary Burkinabe families. Consider what happens when a bale of cotton is exported shortly after the first stages of processing. It supports farmers, transporters, traders, and others involved near the beginning of the chain. But when more of that cotton remains inside Burkina Faso, the same raw material can continue creating economic activity. Workers can spin the fiber into thread. Others can weave or dye the fabric. Tailors can make clothing. Designers can develop new products. Small businesses can produce bags and accessories. Salespeople can bring those products to customers. Each additional stage creates another opportunity for Burkinabe workers to participate in the value of their own cotton. This is particularly important for women and young people. Traditional weaving has long provided income and skills for Burkinabe women, while a growing textile industry could open additional paths for younger workers who need practical employment. Initiatives such as the Burkina Textile Incubator have been created to support innovation, entrepreneurship, financing, and the development of new businesses connected to cotton and textiles. Large industrial projects have also announced projections for thousands of direct and indirect jobs. Those numbers must be treated carefully because projected employment is not the same as employment already created. Still, they reveal what the government believes is possible if more stages of cotton production move into the domestic economy. For Ibrahim Traore, this is where industrialization becomes something more meaningful than an economic slogan. A new factory matters because of the people who can work inside it. A spinning facility matters because it can connect farmers to manufacturers. A training program matters because a young person can acquire a skill that remains valuable for years. The most powerful measure of this strategy will therefore not be the number of groundbreaking ceremonies. It will be whether families can earn stable incomes from industries built around resources their country already produces. If Burkina Faso succeeds, one bale of cotton will no longer represent only an export. It could represent a chain of Burkinabe jobs, skills, businesses, and opportunities. And once those workers can produce finished goods, the next challenge becomes even greater. Turning those products into a name that customers recognize and trust. Creating finished products is only part of the journey. The next step is more difficult and potentially far more valuable. Burkina Faso must move from simply making products to building a name that customers recognize. There is an enormous difference between selling cotton, selling a shirt, and selling a shirt whose origin gives it additional value. The first depends largely on the price of a raw commodity. The second adds manufacturing. The third adds something less tangible but powerful: identity. Burkina Faso already has an important foundation for this transformation. Faso than Fani carries a recognizable cultural history, while the Made in Burkina initiative provides a broader identity for nationally produced goods. These foundations existed before Ibrahim Traore, but his industrialization strategy could give them a larger economic role. This is where Burkina Faso does not necessarily need to compete by becoming the cheapest clothing producer in the world. Competing only on price would place a relatively small industry against enormous manufacturing systems with decades of experience. Burkina Faso can instead develop another advantage by combining local cotton, traditional craftsmanship, modern manufacturing, design, and a story of national origin. Faso than Fani can become clothing, but the opportunity extends further. The same textile identity can appear in bags, accessories, uniforms, household products, and contemporary fashion. If quality remains consistent and production becomes reliable, customers may eventually purchase these products not merely because they need fabric, but because they recognize what Burkina Faso represents. That is the deeper meaning behind the idea of selling a brand instead of merely selling cotton. A bale of raw cotton can disappear into a global supply chain and lose almost every visible connection to the farmer and country that produced it. A finished Burkinabe product can carry that origin all the way to the customer. Traore's challenge is to help build the industrial capacity that allows this identity to reach larger markets without sacrificing quality or authenticity. Success would require reliable production, stronger businesses, skilled workers, effective marketing, and protection against imitation. But if those pieces come together, Burkina Faso could offer something more valuable than another anonymous textile product. It could offer a product that tells the buyer where the cotton came from, who transformed it, and what country stands behind it. The next question is whether that name can travel beyond Burkina Faso and find customers across West Africa and the wider African continent. For Burkina Faso, building a recognizable national brand would mean little if that brand could never travel beyond the domestic market. The country's population can provide an important foundation for local demand, but a modern textile industry eventually needs larger markets. Burkina Faso already has an export promotion agency known as Apex Burkina, which existed before Ibrahim Traore came to power and works to promote Burkinabe products in regional and international markets. The country can also look toward the African Continental Free Trade Area, where deeper trade between African nations could give producers access to customers far beyond national borders. For Traore's industrial vision, this creates an important possibility. Burkina Faso can begin by strengthening production at home, then use regional trade to pursue the scale that a small domestic market alone cannot provide. The first opportunities may be close to home. Mali and Niger share not only geography with Burkina Faso, but also growing political and economic cooperation through the alliance of Sahel states. Beyond the Sahel lies a much larger West African market, with millions of consumers who already understand the cultural importance of African textiles. If Burkinabe producers can deliver consistent quality, competitive prices, and reliable quantities, clothing and textile products could gradually follow the regional routes that raw cotton has traveled for years. Traore has even spoken about the possibility of supplying uniforms to security forces in other African countries. That remains an ambition rather than proof that Burkina Faso has already become a major textile exporter, but it shows how the government is thinking beyond domestic consumption. This distinction is essential. Burkina Faso should not yet be described as the new textile center of West Africa. Building factories and announcing projects is not the same as winning regional markets. Producers still need dependable electricity, efficient transportation, trained workers, financing, quality control, and the ability to deliver large orders on time. Yet, the strategic direction is significant. Instead of viewing neighboring African countries mainly as destinations for raw cotton, Burkina Faso can increasingly view them as potential customers for finished Burkinabe products. That is a much more ambitious economic relationship. If local production becomes competitive, the label made in Burkina Faso could travel with clothing, fabric, uniforms, and accessories across the continent. But before celebrating that future, there is another side of the story that deserves serious attention: the criticisms, risks, and difficult questions surrounding Traore's economic approach. Any serious assessment of Ibrahim Traore's strategy must also confront the criticisms. From a market-oriented perspective, one concern is that the state may be taking too large a role by controlling strategic companies, supporting domestic producers, and using public purchasing to create demand. The nationalization of Sofitex makes this debate especially important. Critics can reasonably ask whether government ownership will improve efficiency or simply transfer financial problems to the state. Others may argue that protecting local textiles could leave consumers paying more than they would for cheaper imports. These are legitimate economic questions. However, there is no solid evidence that Western governments collectively oppose Burkina Faso simply because it wants to process its own cotton. Turning this debate into a story of a Western conspiracy would weaken the argument rather than strengthen it. A stronger response is to judge Traore's strategy by measurable results. If Sofitex becomes more efficient, farmers receive payments more reliably, factories expand production, and workers gain stable jobs, then greater state involvement will have evidence in its favor. If protected companies remain inefficient and survive indefinitely only through government support, the criticism will become harder to dismiss. The same standard should apply to local manufacturing. Burkina Faso may have good reasons to protect a young textile industry while it develops skills and scale, but protection cannot permanently replace competitiveness. Burkinabe products eventually need acceptable prices, consistent quality, reliable delivery, and customers willing to buy them without being forced to do so. There are also challenges that patriotic determination alone cannot solve. Textile factories require dependable electricity. Exporters need roads, transportation, financing, trained workers, machinery, quality control, and access to markets. Burkina Faso continues to face serious constraints in several of these areas. That does not prove Traore's industrial vision is misguided. It shows what must come next. Economic sovereignty is not achieved simply by placing a national flag above a factory. It is achieved when that factory can produce efficiently, employ people sustainably, compete with imports, and eventually sell successfully abroad. This is why the coming years matter so much. Traore has helped define the direction, but results will determine whether the strategy becomes a lasting transformation. And that leads to the larger question facing Africa. What can other resource-rich nations learn from Burkina Faso's experiment? The lesson from Burkina Faso reaches far beyond cotton. Across Africa, countries possess cocoa, coffee, oil, gold, copper, lithium, and countless other resources. Yet, possessing a valuable resource does not automatically mean capturing its greatest economic value. The more important question is what happens before that resource leaves the country. Burkina Faso's experiment offers a simple principle. Do not ask only how much cotton you can produce. Ask how much value you can create from that cotton at home. For other African nations, the same question can be applied to cocoa, minerals, energy, agriculture, and manufacturing. The goal is not to withdraw from world trade. It is to participate in world trade from a stronger position. That is why Ibrahim Traore's approach deserves attention even though its final results are still uncertain. His government is attempting to connect farmers, Sofitex, spinning facilities, textile factories, Fani, public purchasing, workers, designers, and eventually export markets. The vision is ambitious, but ambition must now be followed by performance. Factories must actually operate. Farmers must benefit. Young people must find lasting employment. Products must meet quality standards. Businesses must become competitive. Exports must eventually prove that customers outside Burkina Faso are willing to pay for finished Burkinabe goods. If those things happen, Traore will have demonstrated something far more important than political rhetoric. He will have shown that economic sovereignty can be built through production. And this is why the story matters across African news and discussions surrounding the African Union. What happens in Burkina Faso will be watched far beyond Ouagadougou, including by governments in Mali and Niger, where Assimi Goïta and Abdourahmane Tiani are pursuing their own visions of sovereignty across the Sahel. Relations with France and the wider international system may dominate many headlines, but the deeper struggle in West Africa is also economic. Who grows the resource? Who transforms it? Who owns the factory? And who owns the brand? Ibrahim Traore has not yet answered those questions with final results, but Burkina Faso is attempting something worth watching. If you believe African countries should keep more value from the resources they produce, share your view below and follow this channel as we continue examining whether this transformation becomes a lasting model for Africa. We sincerely appreciate your time and support. Every video on this channel is carefully researched, thoughtfully written, and meticulously edited by our dedicated team. We don't rely on automated production or shortcuts to create our content. Every story, every visual, and every detail is crafted with genuine care, passion, and a commitment to bringing you meaningful, high-quality videos.